Hi there, welcome everyone, and good morning to you today. This is the second COVID-19 Challenge project showcase. It's on improving data and insights for COVID-19 response. My name is Matt Woodhill. I work in the local digital collaboration unit, which is part of MHCLG, the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. I hope it's a bit brighter where you are today than it is here up in deepest, darkest North London. And if not, then I hope that today's presentations bring a bit of light to your mornings wherever you are. First of all, a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to be recording this event and we will make it available afterwards. We'll also send out a follow-up email with links to more info about the projects that you're going to be hearing from today and any other relevant links that are shared in today's presentations. Please use the chat to jog us if there's a specific link that you'd like to have shared. Please keep yourself on mute throughout the event today, and you can use the chat function to ask questions as we're going along. There's going to be 5 minutes for questions after each presentation, and we'll put any questions that are asked in the chat to the speakers at that point. If you are presenting or taking part in the discussion, please though turn your camera on so we can see who you are. So we're going to be hearing from some fascinating projects in this really important area today. There's going to be 3 detailed project presentations, some kind of quicker progress. The event in total is going to be about an hour and a half long. We hope you'll be able to stick with us for the whole thing, and we're going to be aiming to wrap things up by midday. So first of all, a bit of background to who we are in our work. I work at the local digital collaboration unit. We support local government to work together better. Basically, we do this in 3 ways: by funding and supporting collaborative projects to solve common problems, like some of the ones you're going to be hearing from today, by providing training for council staff to develop their digital capabilities, and by bringing people together to share their work and to learn from each other. So hopefully you're already, or very many of you are already familiar with the local digital declaration. The 5 key commitments are on the screen here, and you can read the whole thing at localdigital.gov.uk. The declaration itself is a shared vision for the future of local services. So it's how we all want to work together and how we try to work, and especially how we try to do things through the Local Digital Fund projects. Importantly, I suppose to emphasise, is it's not a standard or a set of rules. It's something for us to collectively aspire to and to hold ourselves accountable to in our work on digital data and technology in local government. The declaration was co-written by 45 founding organisations in 2018, and so far 223 councils have signed it. Thanks for bearing with me. I know that many of you are signatories yourselves and have heard this 100 times already, but for anyone that's not there, signatories get some great benefits like access to free training courses, and of course you can apply for money via the Local Digital Fund and things like the Local Digital C-19 Challenge. So if you're not already signed up, please do visit our website to find out a bit more. Now, this year has clearly been a really challenging time for local government, who have been at the coalface of COVID-19 response and recovery in many different areas. To support the sector, back in June we launched the Local Digital C-19 Challenge, and this made £800,000 available for councils to work on COVID-19 related projects. The purpose of the fund was to give money out to councils to fund new or existing work that responded to a pressing need that could deliver a tangible output within around 2 months, and something that could be reused by other councils. So in total we received 123 applications, and we funded 12 projects in areas that range from information sharing to community engagement and better working practices. Now, in today's showcase, we're going to be hearing from 5 projects in total, and exploring better ways to share and use data better to support council teams, residents and other agencies came through really strongly in those 123 applications we received. And that's one of the reasons you're going to be hearing from 5 projects today, because nearly half of the projects that we funded are tackling issues in this broad area. But these projects are not all about specifically data sharing mechanisms, such as standards and information governance procedures, because what's come through loud and clear is that it's about ways of working around how and what we use to inform insights and place-based intelligence that's really vital. and it's something that has a lot of room for improvement, especially when it comes to crisis response. So there are going to be three detailed presentations today. You'll be hearing how Manchester City Council has been putting local intelligence into the hands of key people working in cross-agency neighbourhood teams in the city. You'll be hearing from a group of councils led by the Greater Manchester Combined Authority into how they're assessing the potential demand for children's services during these times of uncertainty. And two ongoing projects will share their progress so far. They're tackling these knotty issues of standards for vulnerability data and an approach to assessing and identifying residents who might be at risk via a risk index that's based around understanding life events. First up, though, is a project led by Central Bedfordshire and Camden councils, who've been working with the London Office for Technology Innovation and with FutureGov to make sense of information sharing issues and opportunities for councils to work better with their local voluntary and community service organisations. And this is clearly an issue that's been even more pronounced than previously as a result of the pandemic. So I'll now hand you over to Emma McGowan from Camden and Jay Sager from Lottie to tell you a bit more about their work. So Jay, if you'd like to start sharing your screen, that would be fantastic.
Thanks, Matt. That's a great introduction. Really looking forward to hearing about all the other projects as well. Firstly, I'm going to give a little bit of context whilst Jay's getting the screen sharing set up. My name's Emma McGowan. I head up a digital transformation team at Camden Council, but since March have had strategic responsibility for tech data and digital throughout the COVID pandemic. So kind of overnight, my job changed quite significantly, actually, from being something about kind of creating a load of transformational products into actually running operational delivery services for people, providing services to those who were most at need in the first phase of the pandemic. One of the things that we heard really loud and clear from our VCS in the first phase of the pandemic was that the notion of kind of data sharing and data exchange felt really really stuck between Camden and actually we've got, I know Sandra's not speaking, Sandra's on the call from Central Bedfordshire. It's worth pointing out that the relationship Camden have with our VCS is actually quite different to the relationship that Central Bedfordshire have with their VCS, and I think Jay's going to pick up on that in the slides. But our relationship felt quite tense, and it felt like kind of lack of trust between the council and the VCS became further, well, everything was just exacerbated through COVID. And so I really wanted to figure out how we could get better at this, knowing that we were kind of going into a bit of a lull with the summer, but knowing that we are now gearing up again through autumn and winter, and that we just needed to get better at what we meant by data. And so we kind of had this term data exchange. We never really knew what that meant going into this. And I think we were all kind of hopeful that there'd be some magic wand or some product or some kind of like nice sophisticated algorithm that we could just create that would get us better at this. And of course, that's not true. And actually what we realized, as Matt said, that this was much more about ways of working and culture and kind of relationships and understanding one another a bit better. So I'll pass over to Jay because I know we're tight on time. Jay's going to take you through a bit about the project, and then he'll pass back to me, and I'll give you an overview of how we're actually taking this work forward over the next couple of months using the kind of theme of food aid and food insecurity.
Great, thanks Emma. Hi everyone, I'm Jay Sager, Data Products Manager at Lottie, London Office of Technology and Innovation. And really, you know, what Emma stated there in terms of the frame of this project is exactly right. This comes off the back of some really amazing work that's happened during the pandemic in terms of collaboration between the VCS and councils, you know, VCS organisations really providing essential services to those in need, providing food, delivering prescriptions, mental health support, all sorts of other things that are essential to people during this time. But as Emma said, there was some friction and some frustration in those relationships, and it, you know, a feeling that this could be done better. So that was the brief really, and that's what we put into the bid. This idea that we might be able to find something in the data space that could make that relationship easier. So that's what we went in with, and really what our research bared out was that, you know, actually, as Emma said, no magic wand to fix this and make it go away quickly, but actually it really is about the relationships, and that you can put standards or other kind of technical fixes in place, but actually, you know, a lack of understanding and trust and ability are more important than any kind of tech or standard that you put in there. You can build those first, but people won't use them. So what we really found from all the discussions that we had with the VCS that were led by FutureGov, our delivery partner on this, was that we needed to kind of go to first principles around what was actually the reasons that data wasn't flowing, rather than kind of, you know, what is the mechanism to make the data flow. We also heard loud and clear that actually talking about data was maybe a bit off-putting for some of the VCS organizations we were working with. And actually, you know, this term made it seem like something inaccessible and very technical, whereas actually we know that VCS organizations have lots and lots, particularly of qualitative data and insights into the communities they work with, might just not see it as data as such, and that we were kind of introducing something which made actually their expertise become kind of estranged from them, and that wasn't helpful for setting out trying to improve this relationship and make data flow, as we'd like to call it. The third thing we drew out, which is kind of consistent, I think, with the kind of local digital collaboration principles more generally, and the digital declaration, is kind of, you know, taking small steps, working out something that we can do now, and using that as a path to create change and progress things forward. So those were the kind of the very high level findings from the research, and of course the report goes into this in a lot more detail, so you can see more detail on those conversations of where we got to with it. But from that research, we came up with this prioritized solution around a community insights project. How do you actually establish those relationships with the organizations you're working with? How do you actually kind of make it a more level playing field and start to kind of collaboratively build those relationships and think about how data moves in those relationships from the beginning, rather than kind of having this hierarchy between council and VCS, which has not always led to the kind of data sharing outcomes we wanted, and obviously then the kind of the interventions and the services that we'd like to deliver. So community insights projects are an approach which help deal with this. One of the key things we wanted to draw out in this is that we know that there's different skills and capacities between the different partners involved, between councils and VCS organisations, and we were really interested in this idea that actually councils often have really great data teams with lots of skills and capacity in that space. On the VCS side, that's less common, and actually if we can bring those data skills closer to the expertise about local communities in VCS organisations, then we can really start to work in a different way. We can start to draw those insights out, to use them in a more effective way within councils, but not for it to be a one-way relationship. Actually, you know, those insights that data teams can draw from VCS organisations should be there to benefit VCS organisations as well, not just councils. So we looked at a number of characteristics of how the relationships are now and how we'd like the relationships to be in the future. There are quite a lot of details here and we haven't got loads of time, but I'll highlight a couple of things that are important, I think, to focus on and that really shape the project. So we wanted to make the relationship less transactional. We wanted to focus on outcomes and develop those outcomes jointly, not kind of dictate outcomes down from the top. And really then, if you take that approach, you can see the data flowing because you've got those bits in motion first, rather than just expecting start with the data and ask an organization to start providing loads and loads of information, which just becomes a massive burden on them. So if you start with outcomes and actually have a trusted relationship, you're much more likely to succeed in having the data move. But remember, it's not really about the data, it's about what you're trying to deliver in those communities and in your local area. So So the actual project methodology, we set this out in a user guide. It's very detailed and it sets out exactly how you would design and then run one of these projects in terms of the relationships, the roles, the ways of working, and the way that you try to focus on outcomes. That's all in the user guide. We set out a theory of change here, which again emphasizes that if you start with outcomes, then the data follows, and then you actually start to be able to deliver services that work. And really where we're at now is that we need to test this kind of theorized methodology out. It's based in research, but it's not based in actual testing in the real world community. And that's what we need to do next. So what I'll do is hand over to Emma now to talk about where Camden plan to take this next, and then I'll let you all know a little bit about how Lottie want to carry on supporting this beyond the remit of the project funding.
Great, thanks, Jay. I think just to add a few things before I kind of talk about what we're testing in Camden at the moment is, I think like we've learned through this project that like getting better at the community insights project is a part of the jigsaw puzzle in terms of helping us get better at understanding how we act as a place, and then kind of further going kind of into more hyperlocal delivery, so kind of place, community, and then neighborhoods. And I think we've been kind of trying to think about like how do you create the kind of mechanisms and conditions to enable that sharing of information, stories, and gaining insights together. So like a quick example is we have a really good relationship with Age UK, and we were able to get a food delivery service up and running within 3 days and have a really solid data sharing agreement with Age UK in the first week of the lockdown. That was only able to happen because of a really good foundational relationship with them, whereas actually getting data sharing agreements with the other 10 organizations we were trying to do work with felt really, really, really hard. So it kind of proves the point that obviously you can't do that type of complicated and complex work, especially when it comes to data, if you don't have a strong relationship and foundation of trust there. How we're thinking about taking this forward is associated with our food aid work. So we have a massive campaign across Camden at the moment that no family will go hungry over the winter. Obviously, there's kind of 2 things to think about when we're thinking about data there. There's the kind of strategic stuff around, you know, how do we kind of target this service or services and products to people when we just don't know who they are? Like, we know a load of stuff about people who, or families that are entitled to free school meals, but we know the take up around free school meals is very different to the entitlement data. We also don't know a huge amount about the new types of people, like basically people like you and I that might have lost their jobs overnight, couldn't pay their mortgage, and are now having to depend on a food bank to feed their family. We do not have data about who those people are. So only by working with our VCS, who see these people every day and are telling us that we're targeting our services in the wrong place, because actually the people coming through food banks or experiencing food insecurity kind of look a bit like you and me now. We're not going to be able to get every family fed throughout the winter months if we're not working more strategically with our VCS. And then there's an operational part of this that we're trying to work in a really sophisticated way of our VCS. Actually, we're trialing some new ways of kind of capturing data around food capacity in Camden as a place, and trying to surface that in real time to residents about where you will be able to go and get, whether it's halal meat, kosher meat, fresh food, tinned food, nappies, formula, whatever it is that you need, being able to surface that to the public through some kind of mapping tools connected to Google Maps that don't waste people's time. So we've heard a lot of stories about people kind of queuing up for food banks for 2 hours and then not getting the food or the kind of cultural or appropriate food that they needed. So this actually has really engaged us to work with the VCS in a really cool operational way that I think had we not gone through this process of change with them, they wouldn't be trusting us in terms of creating digital products using their data. So I think that's really exciting. We're going to start kind of like working with a group of 10 of those organizations really strategically. We're thinking about having a facilitator who's independent to Camden's VCS and the council coming in to facilitate this piece of work, which is one of the recommendations through the Community Insights project. But I'll pause there. I know we're kind of tight on time, and then if people have questions, but we're happy to kind of share all of the work. I think it's all on the Lottie website anyway, that Jay's, we can share it in the slides afterwards.
All right, thanks Emma, thanks Jay. Please, if you've got any questions, just pop them into the chat bar there. I'll kick off with one of my own, I think. I'm kind of interested to hear from both of you what your experience was in working with VCS in terms of what digital and data capabilities they have, and how far there's been a kind of culture clash in terms of working between data people and VCS type organizations. Obviously, you talked about data almost being a dirty word. You didn't say that exactly, but I wonder what's been your experience of that?
Yeah, there's a real cultural kind of divide, I think, and almost the more that we talk about any kind of digital language, the more off-putting it can be for the VCS. I mean, we're talking about organizations that maybe have access to a database administrator who works part-time in their organization. They're using really clunky tools. I mean, even trying to get them to kind of collaborate on like Google Doc and stuff was quite, you know, quite a surprise for them. So I think there's a lot that we need to do. And I know FIO and GLA are doing some work around kind of digital literacy around the VCS. But even using those terms can be really patronizing and kind of arrogant. So I think one of the real learnings was around language. And I think we all know how important language can be, but we all fall into the trap of kind of talking in our own speak quite a lot. And I'd be interested in kind of others' experience, whether that's kind of working across different groups or kind of like even going into some kind of department within a council. When you talk about data and digital stuff, it can be quite a kind of divide. So Jay, I don't know if you want to add anything, or if Sandra wanted to add anything to that about the kind of Central Bedfordshire experience.
I certainly sort of give a little bit of feedback from Central Bedfordshire, and I think you know, thank you Emma for sort of and Jay for covering off the presentation. And I think it was really it was a great opportunity to work with Camden on and sort of other sort of London areas, because being slightly more rural but not so far from London, seeing the difference in how we work was very interesting. And I think one of the things that we found that we have locally in Central Bedfordshire, and ours also factored in other areas of Bedfordshire, not just Central. We do have a slightly different structure, and we've got basically a framework whereby most of our voluntary sector are channeled through a particular infrastructure set up by 3 particular groups. And within those, then they've obviously got the arms that feed out to the rest of the voluntary sector. So we do have a very good relationship, and I think that was something that came out from the actual review. But one of the things we don't have is huge capacity, so we don't have a lot of capacity with regards to data and all of that type of thing. But I think the way that we worked was very much that they were an arm of the council, and we still do actually see them as an arm of the council. And not just from a funding point of view, because to be honest with you, they don't get huge funding from us, but and we actually knew that they had as much data, possibly better data than some of the stuff that we were getting. So we were able to sort of look at that and sort of make our data to be in such a position that it became ours, and then the ability to share. And we sort of had almost like an assembly line or a conveyor belt about how we were able to use that much more effectively. And then as we would actually use data and spread that sort of information to get sort of assistance, etc., it also came back, and we were able to create something, you know, a greater sort of pool of intelligence, if you like. We haven't been in a position at the moment to agree exactly what our community insight project will be. One of the things we did think about was the digital divide, because as Emma sort of said, it was very interesting to get an understanding about how people were able to even use like Google Docs and stuff like that. I'll put my hand up for that one as well. But I think the thing that was really sort of important for us is that we do want to get the feedback from the voluntary sector. Where is the crunch point for them, so we can actually work on something a lot more with them, taking a much bigger lead as well rather than ourselves. And just the use of data, some of the things that we've been thinking about. One minute we spoke about you know, the digital divide and how we might be able to address that, but the other thing that's came up, and it goes back to the whole sort of thing about data, is it about actually creating that pool? Is it about that data hub that we actually need, and about how we can look to create greater insight about a particular group through that sharing? So there are a few things that we want to do, and as mentioned, we don't have huge resource, so we have to time ours a lot better with what capacity we've got and the capacity, obviously, of the voluntary sector. So we are hoping that from sort of January onwards, that's when we'd sort of kickstart our new project really and take a look at that. So hope I haven't gone on too much, but thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Jay, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, not to that point, but I suppose a couple of things for people to take away if they're interested in this work. One, the research report is available, linked in the slides, which sets out, you know, everything that we talked about in a lot more detail, with all the thinking behind it about why you might want to run one of these projects and what the benefits would be and what the kind of expected changes you might see for running one of these projects. And then there's the user guide, which is a step-by-step how to do this. We very much welcome people to pick that up and have a go at using it, or initially just to provide us feedback. If you read through it and you think, wait, we've missed something, then please do get in contact, let us know what you think we could add into that or that we might need to change. We will then be testing this user guide, as Emma said, with the Camden Food Aid project and hopefully one with Central Beds as well. But we're also looking for other boroughs and councils to take this on. So if you are interested in running one of these projects, please do get in contact with me. I'm happy to kind of guide you through the advice and help you try and get that set up, and then we can use any of your feedback to iterate this guide and improve it so it's a living document which is based on real world experience.
That's great. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Emma. It's a great question from Atul in the chat, but Atul, I think let's come back to that perhaps at the end with regards to all of the projects if we've got time, because I think that could touch upon upon others as well. We're a bit low on time for further discussions around this, so thanks again, Emma and Jay. The next presentation then is from Manchester City Council. So in Manchester, teams around the neighbourhood operate at a hyper-local level, often a ward level, so one team will work across 2 or 3 different wards. And these teams are made up of workers from the council, from health and emergency services, housing providers, other public agencies, and also voluntary and community services sector. But combining the information that they all have to get the most rounded view of a resident or a household's needs can be really difficult. And that's what this project's been working on. So Paul Home and Mark Rainey from Manchester City Council are going to tell you a bit more about their work and how they've been addressing these kinds of challenges.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Paul.
I'll just share my slides. So hopefully they're coming through. So thanks for giving us the opportunity to talk about the project. I'm just going to give a couple of brief introduction slides and then hand over to Mark to talk about the neighbourhood side. And then we'll come back to what the project's found so far. The main thing for us is that because this was built on the back of the first wave of COVID response, we recognise that we had to sort of rapidly build and innovate lots of solutions, very similar to what's just been described in the previous presentation. We're working with new partners in new ways. and developing tools. When the project and the opportunity came about to bid for funds for this, we realised that there was a lot of learning there that we could take forward, not just into sort of COVID now, but into new ways of working within neighbourhoods. Our objective overall was to make sure that we were getting information and intelligence into the hands of our team around the neighbourhood function that Mark will talk about a little bit more. The three things that they told us initially that they wanted were an ability to understand sort of scale and volume of what was going on within their area, be able to manage and reduce demand safely, so deal with individual cases and individual episodes, and be able to deliver more targeted approaches that were right for our residents within places, but we'll touch on all this a bit more in a second. Just a little bit of background in terms of how we went about the project. We've done this internally. We had a core project team of 8 people. We've engaged with about 25 individual engagements with people within neighbourhood team roles and key stakeholders within those neighbourhoods. We've run one pilot that we'll touch on, and we've run 2 workshops to try and understand what was needed. And the project's run for about the last 15 weeks. You can see there that we brought together project people, technical people, engagement people to try and get this done. We built very much on the existing groups and systems that we've got in place, but this has led to us building new partnerships to go forward.
Paul, I don't know if it's just my screen. I hope it is, but actually I can't see the slides you've been going through. We're still on the first slide.
Oh, I have moved through. It should be on slide 3 now. What's going on?
I think if you go to the present view, that might make a difference.
Yeah, it is on present view. Let me just reshare. How is that showing now?
Yeah, we're just on the first slide there, though.
Try again. Does that move now?
No. Perhaps if you just move in the menu on the left-hand side down to the slide you're currently on.
Let me go back.
Yeah.
Are you seeing the screen? Right. Okay.
That's good. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah, it's obviously not sharing the presentation for some reason when I try to run it. So yeah, this was just a quick overview of the project team. As I say, we had 3 elements: project, oversight, technical team, and engagement team. And as I said, that was a core of 8 people, and then we've done lots of engagements. In terms of what we set out to achieve, slightly different our projects in some ways, that we weren't actually expecting to deliver a tool at the end of this run of work right now, but it was very much about understanding the requirements of our local areas, the TANs, the teams around neighbourhoods, and developing a data specification that would help us then work out what we needed to do next. So we're just going to talk around each of those things in the next few minutes. I'll hand over to Mark now, just in terms of the engagement work, background to what the teams around the neighbourhood are, and some of the findings that we've had with that group.
Thank you, Paul, and for the opportunity as well, Matt. I thought that last presentation was very interesting as well, and there's a bit of learning for us to look at, so thank you for that. So I'll start off on slide 6. Thank you, Paul. And what I'll do, I'll just give a very brief explanation of what the Team Around the Neighbourhood is, and then go into a bit more detail of what Paul was saying, but at a very high level. So just in terms of what is the Team Around the Neighbourhood model, so it was established around 18 months ago, and it's very much focused on bringing services together at a neighbourhood level. And across Manchester, we have 32 wards. So what we have done, as Matt said, we have broken those wards down into clusters of between 2 and 4, just based on some of the population sizes. And what the focus is the delivery on shared people and place priorities through the development of one integrated plan for that neighbourhood. Now, it involves the City Council, which is led by the City Council Neighbourhoods Directorate, which I'm part of, the Greater Manchester Police, the Manchester Local Care Organisation, the Health Perspective, registered providers in terms of social housing, and the VCS sector across the city. In a nutshell, it just acts as a leadership team at that neighbourhood level, and it meets on a monthly basis to deliver that integrated plan. Now, given the onset of COVID back in March, it made complete sense that the team around the neighbourhoods were responsible for leading that neighbourhood response to COVID, and they continue to do so given the pandemic is still ongoing and we've got vaccines and testing coming up. So that's the team around the neighbourhood in a nutshell. And if I just move on to slide 7, Paul. And I'm going to cover slides 7 and 8 together in a way because they do link. And now, before, Paul did mention what our key intention was in responding to COVID, about understanding that scale and vulnerability at a household level, managing and reducing demand safely, and managing it, and targeting our resources on the right people in the right places at the right time. Now, our learning from the approach, and it does link to a couple of wards here, but also some other wards across the city, is that bringing some of this data together, it just helped the team around the neighbourhood leadership team just to understand that level of complexity and vulnerability, or clinically extremely vulnerable residents, in a bit more detail, so they could actually plan the deployment of their resources, and it's the collective resources that prevent duplication. Partners could also see what was expected of them, so a bit of an ask, because each resident was different, or each community, but also all the wards are different as well, so it's very clear what was expected of them. And the wards and those communities are different by demography, diversity, or deprivation as well. So that was considered in this approach. But also, it's helped us to understand through that pilot approach just the other levels of data and indicators we got from other team around the neighbourhood members. And one that we did bring in a bit later was community health data, because we worked with our Manchester Local Care Organisation to complete a data protection impact assessment, so we can add in more data on community health, so we could just see what the health service was also doing with these communities and feed that in. But overall here, and it just helped us drill down to where support was needed and prevent duplication, as I said before. But it also helped us, or informed us, to then the need to strengthen that strategic approach with our data and intelligence across those 10 members to keep informing our strategic and operational approach in a way, and decision making. And slide 8 just breaks down and summarises what I've just said there about that geographical focus, clinically extremely vulnerable, insight, the multi-agency response, and reducing duplication at that neighbourhood level. If I go on to slide 9, so this just backs up what I was saying, and this is feedback from that leadership team and other frontline services. We've had some workshops here, and it just shows why this data and intelligence approach is just instrumental to help us deliver those shared people and place priorities, which includes that COVID pandemic in a way. And the key point here for us is how we include that people's voice, which is on this slide here, and the equality and inclusion aspect, because we know we've done a lot of work, more detailed work in a few of those team around the neighbours. We know across the whole city, back to the uniqueness, the demography, the deprivation, the cultural diversity, and how all that intelligence feeds in, really. So if I then summarise on slide 10, so this informs the way forward for us, really, in our close working with Paul and his team. So in summary, before I pass over to Paul, I think based on our experience and what we have done and all the workshops that we've had, the approach has provided us with a bit of a clear framework and rationale for the integration and interpretation of the data going forward. And what this has led to for us is that what we need going forward, which is critical for us, is that our team around the neighbourhoods continue to understand the neighbourhoods they work in. We want that focus on informing our forward planning and the deployment of our resources. And this is even more key given the budget position of the public sector and how we continue to work even closer with the third sector. It's how this approach will inform our actual frontline service delivery. So what are we doing now? Is that still needed going forward? And how can that data and intelligence actually shape what we do? But keep using that data and insight just to understand our residents in a way. So all TAM members going back to understand the communities they work in and not forgetting that equalities and inclusion agenda. So all of this work that we have done since March has really led us to where we are now with the support of Paul's team. So pass back to you, Paul.
Thanks, Mark. So I think from that engagement work that we've done, I think at the start of this we maybe expected just a list of data items that were going to come back from our neighbourhood teams, but as Mark just described, it's far more complicated than that. It was things about how do we understand much more about our communities, much more about our residents, much more about the assets and offers within those communities, and that was, you know, really interesting learning for us that has led into the specification work I'll just run through. So the output from what Mark's just described is we're in the process of writing that up at the moment, so it gives a view of the, you know, if Manchester's neighbourhood approach is typical of what you see elsewhere and what others are trying to achieve, there are some lessons in there that will enable others to have a look at that and see whether that is applicable to them and maybe fast track some of those conversations around how that might work. The second part is now about the document that we're producing around how we might go about developing a solution to support that. So the first slide here is just talking about what we've already got. So what we had to rapidly develop as part of the COVID pandemic response and the need to support vulnerable residents within our communities was that we were already bringing together data. We had information from government and from health partners around shielding, people who were contacting us for support, and for those where there is a request for support from us, we were then able to match that against other records that we had within the system. So as Mark says, we've got council services like social care, revenue and benefits services, housing benefits services, but we're also within that wider group, we've got housing providers, we've got other partners within there, and bringing together some of that intelligence enabled us to look at the list of vulnerable residents, vulnerable households that we had, and pick out the most appropriate response and target their response through the right channels. So this already exists, and we're writing this up in terms of how this data is coded, designed, and collected. What the work then led to in terms of the listening to the requirements from the engagement work on stage one was that we feel like there's unsurprisingly the sort of these 5 broad areas in terms of what a solution needs to look like. So there's something around data capture that we need a solution to include. It needs to capture data in 2 directions is the key thing for us. We're quite good at putting information together when it comes out of admin systems. So actually, this is the person on the list, this is the household that's receiving support. What we're not good at is actually the feedback loop that closes off. This is actually the action that we took. This is actually the outcome for the resident or the individual, etc. So there's some examples in that red bracket at the top around new data and the types of things that we need to collect. The second thing was about moving from the stuff that we did very quickly to innovate and get things off the ground into something that's more stable, but still scalable. So we need to focus on data standards, and we've been doing quite a bit of thinking around what that means in terms of data standards. Data matching's a challenge. How do we do that? We've realised through the work that we've done that actually for the purposes of the COVID response work, addresses were the best link for various reasons, and the report will describe that a bit more. But we are also thinking about how do we build on some of the more person-centric ways of bringing stuff together, whether it's through NHS numbers or other records. Data sharing, we haven't quite got a solution, as I say, around this, but we have got something that we can use for bespoke projects. That's bespoke times. As Mark said, we've done a DPIA for part of that, where we know we're going to exchange data, and we can do that in a way that's right and proper now. But as we move forward, we need to look at data sharing more broadly and work out how do we control access to data, as well as wrap around the appropriate legal elements that we need to do around that. And then the final bit is around reporting. Various different types of outputs that we want here. Some people want a list, some people want a map, some services need a number. Those are the types of things that we're building into the specification. One thing that we did, again, think about was we thought that this might be one tool, one product at the end of this, but actually where we get into is that it's probably more of a toolkit and a suite of things. Some of the images that on the slide are products that already exist for other purposes, and actually it's about putting those together. I think as the first presentation described, putting things together that already exist to tell a story and respond to requirements. A few things on the bullets on the side that sort of duplicate the requirements earlier on. Whatever we do needs to be flexible. It needs to capture assets. It needs to be able to share data and use the right technology to do that. Where we're going next with this is that we have realised that some of the gaps in that, some of the things that we've already got, but we need to do more on, is that we have done something to include some risk matrix elements. So there's been a different project internal that we've been doing to try and look at which neighbourhoods and communities are most at risk. And we're building that into this work as part of the requirements we're requiring it. And we are tinkering and moving those other business as usual products to build together towards that suite. One big important thing on this slide is the second bullet point around adopt a neighbourhood scheme. Again, I think this came up in the earlier presentation, that our neighbourhood functions are great at understanding their neighbourhoods. They're not analysts. They don't always know where data is. They don't always know how to get the most out of it. So we have launched an internal scheme with our analyst staff to say, actually, would they adopt a neighbourhood and actually act as a conduit and an advisor to try and support that, and that's something we're working on right now. The key benefits of all this that we've started to quantify is that if we get this right, we'll be much more proactive, and the piloting work's shown this so far. We'll be better to prioritise. It's definitely improving our partnership work. In the pilots really showed the fact that we were able to bring organisations together by showing them in a data sense that there was a common challenge or common opportunity, and that's been great. And obviously that's leading to reduced duplication and better understanding for everybody working in those areas. And the final slide for me, very conscious of time, and I think we've gone over, is just we've got a bit of a timeline for the next few months. As I say, where we're moving next is to try and look at where do we take those requirements in terms of a solution. For Manchester, that solution might be we take all of the specification work that we've done and embed it within an internal database, or we may partner up with an external organisation to try and build something bespoke. That's the bit that we'll be exploring in the new year. But as you'll see on this timeline, the world's already moved on. Actually, what we were describing at the start of this about getting food parcels to people who might be vulnerable, or getting medications out, or actually just doing welfare checks, has moved now to actually how do we prioritise and plan for mass testing, how do we plan for vaccination programmes. It's already started to move, and the fact that we've done this work has positioned us really strongly to be able to do that quite quickly. Lot I've gone through there, a lot of slides from us, but I will stop there and take any questions.
Thanks a lot, Paul and Mark. I think we might be a bit tight for time on questions at the minute, but let's come back to that if we have got time towards the end of the event. I think for everyone we can share some contact information for you, Paul, if they want to find out more, and there's going to be a kind of summary blog post that wraps up where they've got to with this, alongside the publication of the report a bit later on. So I think that will be certainly published in a week or two, won't it, Paul? So yeah, thanks again to both of you. The final detailed presentation today is going to be from a team who have been modelling demand for children's services during COVID. The changes brought about during the first lockdown disrupted the way children's services teams worked, and among other things, schools ceased to be a physical centre point, and vulnerable children had to spend more time in their family environments, where everybody in the household is feeling the strain of these unprecedented times. Project partners have come together to define a way of modelling different scenarios so that they could understand the demand for their services and, of course, plan budgets and resources accordingly. So this has been led by the Greater Manchester Combined Authority in partnership with East Sussex County Council, Kent County Council and the London boroughs of Wandsworth and Waltham Forest, among others. It's been supported by Social Finance, and so now we've got to tell you a bit more about what they've been working on, Alistair Herbert from East Sussex County Council, and both Christopher Owen and Sarah Guerrero de Souza from Social Finance to go into a bit more detail. So I'll pass over to, I think, Chris, you're showing your screen now. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Chris is sharing his screen and Alistair is talking, just to mix it up a bit. Thanks for having us. So my name's Alistair Herbert and I look after Data to Insight, which isn't quite an organisation and it's not quite a partnership. It's more of an idea about what things we can do in children's services once on behalf of 150 authorities is the kind of core idea. So this is a great example of that. The real key problem we had was basically we had analysts in departments locally across the whole country panicking because they didn't know what was happening. There was lockdown was happening. Referrals were looking slightly down at the front door, and they were imagining these tidal waves of demand hitting them as soon as schools went back and vulnerable children became more visible again. So what we did was pull together some funding centrally, run off a modelling prototype that one local authority had built, and pass that off to Social Finance, who put dedicated developer time on it for 8 weeks, working in partnership with a couple of different circles of local authorities to develop a demand modelling tool within 8 weeks that went back out to about 60 local authorities downloaded it actually in the end. It was available to all of them to get real kind of indicative numbers against those feelings of panic and work through the different factors that might be relevant to their modelling. But the really exciting thing about it in terms of the showcase is probably this idea of how we work together to do it, and that model of taking one thing for the stuff that we all need to do and making sure that everyone can access it once it's been done once, but making sure also that we use our network so that as many authorities as possible, as many different voices can feed into the design decision. And we have this kind of ability, because we're working for lots of authorities, to tap into funding that wouldn't be available to an individual authority, to do things like get Social Finance and their expertise to just work non-stop on it for the period of time we need it, so that we've got it in time to use it. This probably wouldn't have happened if one local authority had tried to do this on their own, and it definitely wouldn't have been as useful to lots of different people. So really it's about that kind of economy of scale, but it's also about keeping it driven by the local government agenda and by the voices of people in those localities who know what's happening and what's important to them. So as it was Chris and Sarah who did most of the hard work on this, I'm going to pass over to them to explain the rest of it. But I just wanted to kind of set that context and what I think is exciting about it. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Alistair. Yeah, so I think as Alistair has mentioned, and I think as it seems to have come through from a lot of these presentations today, because of the need and because of the fact that we were facing a crisis and it was something evolving as many of these projects were taking place, what's come out of the projects has had, I guess, differing ongoing benefit going forward. And I think we had a tool that we created that was useful and in responding to this immediate need. But now, as we look forward, what's really come out of this project, and I think the benefit that we really want to highlight and talk through today is around the collaborative working and how having this network of individuals and local authorities through the Data to Insights network and community meant that we were able to rapidly develop and launch a tool in response to this need in a time of crisis. And so we thought probably the best way to highlight this and to explain the lessons of this process is to actually talk through the process that we went through and the different stages, and how at each stage of this process, having this network available and being embedded in this wider community of local authorities really enhanced the different elements of this of the development of this tool and scaling it to be able to be used by a wide group of authorities. So I think the first area where we really saw the benefits of having a network like this was actually in identifying the problem itself. So I think everyone's very aware of this. When the lockdown hit, suddenly schools were closed, courts were closed, regular processes ground to a halt, and people were rapidly having to figure out, okay, how are we going to operate in this new environment? And I think for children's services departments in particular, the question was, well, what is the impact of this going to be on my need? A lot of them saw a significant drop in their referrals, and there was a question of, okay, well, when is that demand going to represent? Is it going to come back? Are we going to see it later? And how can we prepare for and budget for that and have the right conversations around that? And so I think the network was really valuable here because first we could see that this was a problem that we were hearing from many different local authorities. But I think also we were able to quickly see and identify promising work that was being undertaken to develop solutions. So I think most local authorities, as you might expect, were busy to responding to the crisis and didn't have the time available to devote to complex data work. But we were able to identify a few different local authorities. The most promising one was Kent, where they were doing work to identify what this demand would look like going forward. So the Kent model was built for Kent, and it looked at basically what had been the drop in referrals to children's services, both from schools, but also from the range of other referral sources. And it then estimated how much of that was likely to appear later. And that information could then feed into staffing decisions and budgeting conversations. I think what was really exciting about being able to identify this tool and having this network available to us is we could very quickly validate how useful that sort of tool would be for people. So the tool itself, the Kent version of the model, which, as I say, was developed for Kent specifically, was quickly shared around within the Data Insights network. And instantly we saw people downloading, people would repurpose and add different features. And generally, we were able to very quickly validate that this was a need that lots of local authorities had, even if the tools, even if many of them didn't have the tools or the time available to really look at this problem themselves. And a lot of the work was very much happening in siloed ways without too much communication happening between different local authorities. So I think it's really important to highlight here that the MHCLG funding was integral in then enabling us to go from having this need and having a clear need that had been validated and was something that we knew we needed to build a tool around, to actually being able to put in place a core multidisciplinary team that could actually begin to develop that tool. And that multidisciplinary team would mean that they could engage with this wider network of those who were doing little bits and pieces of work, trying to do this forecasting here and there, those who'd repurposed the Kent model, all of those different individuals who were engaged around this issue, and then consolidate those efforts around one single tool to make sure that all local authorities, even those who didn't have the time to develop a tool themselves, would be able to benefit from the expertise and the work that had gone into developing these types of tools by a variety of different local authorities around the country. So that's identifying the problem. I think the next place where the data to insights network became really valuable is in the development of the tool itself. So once we had put in place this core team and started to build a tool, what became really important is actually testing this tool, getting it in front of people, seeing how well it met their needs, seeing how well it was answering the questions that they were facing at a given point in time, and ensuring that we could then take that feedback and incorporate it into the tool and iterate quickly to respond to what we were hearing. So we operated in quite a different way, I think, to how we had typically worked, and I think part of that was because we had this network available, and I think it essentially had three main pieces. So there was this core team, which was comprised of data to insight and social finance, and obviously data to insight also involves East Sussex, and so it meant that we had that local authority perspective who were there and could be involved in the day-to-day building of the tool and thinking through prioritization of what features were most important. Outside of that, we had a regular feedback circle, which had 2 more local authorities who would be engaged multiple times throughout the process and would regularly feedback on different features that actually we were testing or trialing, and tell us how well they were working, how intuitive they were. And it meant that we could quite quickly get very detailed feedback without having to explain what the tool was all over again. I think the third component, so this fresh eyes feedback community, was absolutely crucial here, because ultimately we were building a tool that we wanted to go to all 151, or at least be usable by all 151 local authorities in the data to insight community. And these local authorities would not have all been involved in the development of the tool. So we needed people who were seeing this tool with fresh eyes for the first time to make sure that as we were going along and adding features and adding complexity and adding in all of these extra things that we were hearing from our kind of core feedback group, these were still making sense to people who'd never seen the tool before and were easy to understand and easy to use in that way. So this led to, so all of this feedback then came into our core team, and then it was prioritized to determine which features would be added. And obviously in 8 weeks, there was a lot of prioritization required there. So a couple of the key things that came out of that, there was the need to model a second lockdown, and I think we've all seen how valuable having that feature was now. And then I think the other really interesting piece was as the project evolved, we actually literally over the course of the development, the need to understand your referrals and how referrals would be impacted diminished as schools returned and you actually saw exactly what your referrals would be. But there was an emerging need to understand what the long-term impact of the lockdown and closures and just the economic impact as well would be on longer term elements of children's services demands, such as child protection plans and looked after children. And so we were able to build into the model features like that, which would enable it to have long-term usefulness for local authorities that used it. So all of this sat within the wider community of 151 local authorities. And I think this wider community became really key when, once this tool had been developed, we thought about how we could get it to as many people as possible that could potentially develop that. So I will now hand to Sarah, who can talk a little bit more to that process.
Thank you, Chris. So a little bit about the scaling of this model. And by the way, we've been talking a lot about the model and how it's been developed, and the model is available in case people are interested in looking at the model. So I guess one of the challenges around projects like this is they often benefit only those people who are directly involved in the project. And I guess the difference in this one is that we benefit, again, as Chris has mentioned, from the Data to Insights network and MSCLG's network, and we were able to share the tool with 151 local authorities. And so far, we got 60 local authorities to download. So I think this was again reinforcing the role of this network in not just in the development of the tool, but also in being able to scale the tool to all these local authorities. And in terms of also the sustainability and the long-term plan of the tool, because we have an infrastructure in place, and because Data to Insights and Alistair in specific is now maintaining the tool, I think we can now reassure that there's an organization kind of maintaining the tool, and it's who's going to maintain the tool going forward. So this was kind of the scaling. I just wanted to finish. I feel like Chris, you've already talked a lot, but I just wanted to summarize. If we move to the next slide, I think the three aspects or the factors that kind of made this project a success, and kind of the learnings from the project very quickly. So I think the first one that Chris already mentioned was the fact that the team, and that we had a very dedicated, flexible team with a combination of kind of skills in user research to be able to test the model with local authorities, but also with the Excel skills and being able to kind of do a lot of stakeholder engagement during this process. I think combined with the expertise in the children's services domain, which we were kind of modeling in this case. So I think the team was quite an important factor here. Then obviously the funding, having MSCLG's funding in the face of a crisis like this allowed, I think, a much faster turnaround that would than it would usually be the case. And so this was really important. And I think the last one is the one we've talked mostly in the presentation, because I think the funding, however, could not be used to its full potential without having engaged the community of potential users. And the fact that MSCLG and Data to Insights have provided the access to this wide range of local authorities for trialing the tool and then sharing the tool was really crucial to the success of the project. So these were kind of our three factors of success, and really the message that we wanted to leave with you was that really the community has a very network benefits, and I guess the more people are involved, the more it can contribute to our understanding of the problems, and then shaping the solution and creating a solution like this model, and more the people can benefit from what has been developed and what has been released. So I guess that's our key message for today. And if anyone has questions.
All right, thanks so much, Alistair, Chris and Sarah. I think we've got time for about one quick question, so please pop it into the chat or appear with your camera now if you'd like to ask it. Otherwise, I'll go ahead with something myself. So, I mean, what's been fascinating for us working with you on this is how well organised you have been in that established network, and how quickly you moved to the tool, I suppose. I'm interested, maybe this is more directed at you, Alistair, though Chris and Sarah, please feel free to jump in. What's been your experience using it so far? Do you have kind of analytics, or are you able to talk to us about some of the benefits that you're seeing?
Yeah, so it's been really interesting because we had this whole thing during the design process about how much, given it was a short project, how much of it was a model we were developing and saying this is what happens with referrals during a lockdown, given this is an unprecedented situation, and how much of it was about giving local authorities who, in this context, don't do a lot of data modeling or prediction or thinking about the future, giving them tools that they could say, well, this is what I think is going to happen. and let's see the indicative numbers based on those assumptions that I'm making locally. And we kind of erred more towards the second, in that recognition that, well, our community is saying, well, we're built up of different places. Birmingham's lockdown story is not going to be the same as my story in Todmorden in Calderdale, or the same as someone on the south coast. So we erred towards saying, well, here are the different things we think are important factors. We built up some indicative kind of predictors based on that, based on the feedback from our local authorities, saying this is kind of the average of what's coming out of that. So if you start with that and put your data in, you'll get something, but you need to tweak it locally. And what we found actually is that local authorities in the main that have used it were slightly more concerned about a kind of surge of referrals in November than perhaps they should have been, but less concerned about the kind of longer term slowdown in the back end of the care system. And so things like the courts are closed, so no one's getting discharged from a looked after child care order. Things like 5 of my child protection caseworkers are off sick, so I'm having to pull people off other areas of casework to work on those most vulnerable children at this time when the schools aren't seeing them. And that's been really interesting learning that we're going to try and take forward into the tool as we develop it further, to say, well, actually, some of these things that you're predicting, let's revisit that now that we've got some of the data and say, well, what do we think are the important factors and how much difference do they make? Because we got quite good numbers out of it in terms of, well, yes, something's going to change, but the things that people were putting into it in terms of their assumptions were maybe a little bit more apocalyptic than actually turned out to be the case. I don't know if that answers the question or gives a sense at least of what we're working on.
Yeah, shed some light on actually people's mindsets, perhaps, going through this.
Yeah, maybe.
I think it's going to be really fascinating to kind of see what kind of benchmarking you're able to do out of this in the next I don't know, 6-12 months and so on, to really understand how it's benefiting people really tangibly as well.
Yeah, the interesting thing about it is that as this kind of situation continues, does lockdown become less of the dominant factor again? And even though lockdowns are still happening, how do we quantify that in terms of importance when we're talking about demand for children's social care? Is it the most important thing, or is actually the same drivers we've always had in terms of poverty and place and community, intergenerational factors, are they the kind of things still? And lockdown's just a little thing that tips on the top of that. But all of that stuff is kind of useful in terms of this project being a kind of way to say, a lot of these people that downloaded this tool probably didn't do any modelling before. So now we've got a foot in the door and we can say, well, let's help you take this forward. Let's develop this into a longer term model that you can start using alongside your kind of regular performance reporting in children's services departments. That's quite exciting.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks again to you, Alistair, Chris and Sarah. We'll move on to the next set of quick updates. So just bear with me 1 second. Of course, screen sharing always takes a bit of time. Okay, so well, first of all, we're going to hear some quick updates from 2 projects. We've got Shelley Heckman from Thameside Council, who's going to talk to us about projects that's aiming to develop a scalable approach to vulnerability via interoperability. So, Shelley, I think I'm managing the slides here. Just tell me when you want me to progress through them.
Thanks, Matt. If you could just go on to the next slide. I just wanted to say very quickly that I've really enjoyed this morning's presentations from all the other speakers, because I could see how SAVVI can fit into or complement some of that work. And I'm hoping that by the end of this I promise, very quick update that you've asked me to do, that you guys can see that as well. So our project is SAVVI, and as Matt has said, it's Scalable Approach to Vulnerability via Interoperability. And I'm Shelley Heckman, and I'm the Director of iNetwork. I see a lot of friends already this morning, but for those of you that don't know what iNetwork is, we are a networking partnership that's hosted by Thameside Council, and we have a sister program called iStand UK that looks and supports government data standards. And this is principally an Iceland UK project. Matt, if you could go on to the next slide. Because this is an update and I was given literally like 3 minutes to do, this is very high level. So I'm going to talk to you about a very quick update about what SAVVI is, what our key achievements are so far, and our key next steps remaining. So next slide. What is SAVVI? I think we've all sort of started with a problem statement, and it's really interesting to note that that our problem statement isn't too dissimilar to the other problem statements that we've heard this morning. Essentially, local councils need to identify vulnerable people and vulnerable households, and then lead some sort of multi-agency or community response in assessing those needs or providing support and interventions. And for all councils, in some way, shape or form, it's involved blending attributes from data sourced from many local or national organisations and using your own data sets. The problem, though, is that councils have found, and I would hazard a guess that the other projects that we've heard from this morning will recognise some of these issues, is that data sets containing vulnerability attributes need to be discovered and shared. We don't know where they are, who has them, that sort of thing. Attributes are really hard to extract from many data sets because of inconsistencies, such as inconsistent semantics, quality, governance, that sort of thing. That matching data sets is really, really imprecise due to the inconsistent use of identifiers and lack of biographic standards, and that action tracking in real time across agencies requires a standards-based ecosystem. And actually what we're doing a lot of the thing is seeing a snapshot in time. So if we go to the next slide, and I've had to condense about 30 slides to create this one, but essentially what I want to leave you with in terms of what it is that SAVVI will try to do and what our output is at the end of our project, is that we want to produce a playbook that incorporates a number of things. One is a data standard, or some data standards to share life events and episodes, circumstances and risk factors as attributes for vulnerable people and vulnerable households. That it incorporates data flows for some core vulnerability scenarios, and essentially those will be COVID-19 and looking at homelessness vulnerability as well. The playbook will also include standards and protocols to share interventions and actions across multiple agencies, and also an information governance framework and standards for sort of discovering, assessing, joining data. That is our minimum viable product. Can you just move on to the next slide? So the key achievements so far are projects, like most projects, has sort of different stages. We've completed the mobilization, the discovery and the scoping stage, and our team works to a Trello board. And when I was looking at this Trello board to pick out the key achievements, I mean, it was quite overwhelming, but I think I've captured some, and this is definitely not representative of all of it. But some of the key achievements is that we've done a lot of engaging and collaborating, and we've got 15 core partners. We've worked with more partners, but we've got a core set of those 15 partners who are really bought in. And they range from government agencies, so we've got DWP, MHCLG, Cabinet Office, Data Standards Authority, ICO. In that, we've also got local authority partners, including some that we've heard this morning, ranging from combined authority, unitaries and districts in different parts of the country. And we're also working with the tech industry. So one of our partners is Tech UK, and we are also working with sort of the voluntary and community sector as well. So that's really, really vital for us. We've captured a bunch of user stories. I was going to go and try to count those user stories. I had a number, but I wasn't sure. So, but we've done that through a number of workshops.
I've delivered 3 data requirement workshops, one with our partner Huntingdonshire District Council, who you'll hear from next, I think, after this update. And we also have done some data requirement workshops looking specifically at both homelessness vulnerability and COVID-19 vulnerability. We've developed and tested concept models. We have delivered an information governance workshop to start. So out of a lot of these workshops, we've heard that IG was a massive issue, and so this particular workshop was around looking at whether or not we could develop a framework, an IG framework, particularly for secondary use of data, so that we can take data that we've got permission for one use, and whether or not we can reuse it in order to be able to do the things that we want to do and blend. Other sessions with UPRN. In fact, Paul Davidson, who was supposed to give this presentation, is currently in a UPRN session with GeoPlace. We've got metadata sessions as well, looking at and considering metadata repositories. And we are publishing those a lot of those workshop insights. We've already published a couple of them, and we're in the process of publishing more. If you could go on to our next slide, please. So in terms of our key next steps, we have the 2 phases. We're currently in our scoping. We're currently in our solving phase, and there will be a prove phase to our project, which will end in January 2021. So between now and then, in the next sort of 6 weeks or so, as part of our solve phase, we have a workshop coming up with Tech UK. One of the things that we really want to do with tech suppliers is to listen to them, to ask them, you know, what was your experience when you were working with us local authorities during the first sort of lockdown, trying to help us to solve identifying are vulnerable, and what products did you throw at us, what tech did you throw, what was your experience. It'll also be quite crucially for our project the first time that we will showcase our playbook that we are currently developing, to see if we can get a first response as to whether or not the standards that we are coming up with, do they recognize that as something that they could adopt, because we recognize that actually standards for standards' sake, you know, we could create standards and it not be used by anybody. So what we want to be able to do is make sure that the standards fit both the users, us in the public sector, that it works with our government partners, but also crucially with the tech sector as well. We will be picking out some key data flows over the next a couple of weeks. We are in the process of sort of doing our process maps and the data standards. All of that will be part and parcel of our playbook. The testing and prove it phase is really specifically, so the project's ultimate vision is that the SAVVI standards will result in reduced hardship for vulnerable people and households, and ultimately will have succeeded when SAVVI standards have been adopted by local authorities as they coordinate their response to vulnerability. It'll have succeeded if, say, local and national agencies make their data available for reuse in this form, and whether the private sector, as I've already said, and the suppliers, they also adopt the data, you know, into their data services and their solutions. But in terms of a more tangible sort of 12-week, well, the end of our project output, our prove it phase really is whether or not our partners, Huntingdonshire District Council, have been able to reuse the standards that we come up with in their live events vulnerability project. That that we have feedback from Tech UK about how likely their members are to embed the standards in their products, and also that when we have feedback from GMCA, who is Phil Swan is our project sponsor and they're a key partner, that we have feedback from them that the SAVVI standards have been trialled in their models with the work that they're doing, and we hope to do that by January 2021. Just going to the next slide, it's just for me to say thank you very much, and we share everything at this this website, and if you've got any questions, I'd be happy to take them, or you can contact me directly at this email address.
Thanks a lot, Shelley. I think there are some questions in the chat that you might want to have a quick look at and perhaps respond there. We're incredibly short on time now, and want to have a quick update from Huntingdonshire as well. Also, just a note, there was a comment from Emma about links. So from people who've been presenting so far, please put links to blogs and things in the chat so that other people can follow up on those. So I'm just going to now pass over to my colleague, actually, Michael Mentesi, who works in MHCLG, who's going to give you an update on behalf of the project led by Huntingdonshire District Council. And that project's defining a risk index to identify vulnerable residents that don't fall into traditional vulnerability categories or appear on shielded patient lists. So quite an interesting space there. Michael?
Thanks a lot, Matt. Yes, my name is Michael Mentesi. I am a delivery manager in the local digital collaboration unit, and I've been working alongside Huntingdonshire District Council on their project. So I thought I would give you an update based on their last show and tell. So their project objectives have been to understand and test the impact of life events and underlying risk factors on the likelihood of a future crisis occurring. And really that's all about identifying the point at which the underlying risk tips over into a crisis. And then based on this information, they really want to start to design and test interventions with future potential high-risk customers digitally through outbound contact, and testing this approach in different localities as well as against COVID-specific crisis and risk and more general crisis and risk as well. And then with all of this is reviewing the implications of all this work, as has been mentioned in other presentations around information governance, use of data, and then what that means for the structure of work and the way that the authorities incorporate this into the way that they manage the need in the future. So how have they gone about this? Well, actually, this has been a huge effort of mapping customer journeys, and this is with via interviews with people who've experienced the crisis. So both more traditional, what you class as more traditional crisis, so homelessness, mental breakdown, things like that, as well as things specific to COVID as well. And this has been targeted at a number of different geographical locations to incorporate the factor of place on need as well. Now, these journey maps that have been carried out through these interviews have had scores associated to them based on a stress score, as well as the Manchester Combined Authority cost score as well. So some initial outputs from that work have been some great resources for people to be able to, for Huntingdonshire to be able to share with their partners, to be able to conduct and carry out these interviews and to develop these journey maps. Actually, the development of lots of journey maps, a number that have been scored against the stress scores, and then a number that have been scored against the cost score. And then actually, as a byproduct of this has been an action plan for people who needed support as part of this process, who were identified through the interviews. An action plan has been put in place for those as well. The key findings from all this work, so all of these interviews, has been that multiple life events in a short space of time can contribute to a crisis occurring. And you can see some headline figures there that 91% of those experiencing a crisis also experience what the team are defining as a snowball event. So where multiple factors occur within a relatively short period of time, it can tip somebody over into a crisis occurring. So based on that information that they've found out, they're looking to develop this model. So looking at the things that contribute to these snowballs, where somebody has had multiple events that have tipped them over into a crisis, looking at the most common events and looking at what the factors are of time elapsing, so how in what scale of these events happened, and are there any common or critical situations that occur that tip somebody into a crisis. And these commonalities are really useful for them to be able to develop a universal intervention. So things that can be reused, but to support people in basically getting involved before it tips over into a crisis, and then testing some of these ideas out. And so moving is identified as actually something that can be a hugely stressful situation, and often linked to other changes in a family environment. And so could a welcome pack email to somebody moving into the area that signposts to services actually reduce the people's risk of moving into a crisis. The output of this is all going to be reusable tools and resources. So lots of the things I've mentioned here, outbound scripts, comms resources, all can be reused. But actually there's also a real focus on digital tools for this. So looking at tools like Power Apps and GovNotify to enable bespoke targeted comms based on monitoring of these risk factors and risk scores, life events happening, and then reacting to those in a proactive way to mitigate against the risk. And just building on the project really that SAVVI are working on, so this life events data standards, incorporating those data standards into this model as well. So actually, that's where the rubber hits the road, or as to whether does that data standard work in a tool like this. And we're looking at delivering results on this in January next year. So that's the project in a whirlwind nutshell. You can follow along at all the usual places, our blog and on the local digital Slack, and there will be a more detailed presentation of the results in a showcase event in the new year. But that's me.
Thanks, Michael. So just to reiterate what Michael said there, from these last two presentations, both the SAVVI one and the Risk Index project, we're going to be putting on a specific dedicated showcase to those two things, which will be in January. And I guess, yeah, well, look out in that follow-up email that we send for links to where you can follow those in a bit more detail, and all of the other projects that you've heard from today. I know that some people have started to add links already into the chat there, so do follow up on those if you're interested. Just remains for me to say then thank you to everyone who's been here today, and for all of you really for joining us now and bearing with us as we've gone just fractionally over what we intended to, but thanks for your patience with that today. We're going to be making the recording available of this event, so look out for that if you're interested. Obviously, perhaps more importantly, if you've got colleagues who weren't able to make it who might be interested in these things. And we are going to be running one more showcase event next week, in fact, where we're going to hear about two projects, one led by Newcastle, one led by Bournemouth, and that's going to be about tools to help residents maintain social distancing in busy locations. So I hope to see many of you again for that. If you found this useful though, please do pass on the links to the next showcase event to your colleagues who are working in the relevant areas, if that's not yourself, but we do hope to see you again. So thanks for joining us. Once again, look out for that follow-up email. That'll have all the links to more things, and that should be out with you by the end of today or tomorrow at the latest. So thanks again. Enjoy the rest of your week. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you all again soon.